Imagine what it would be like for you right now to be picked up and to be dropped into a culture or into a world that seemed to be totally unbuilt for you. Imagine right now if you were to be dropped onto a subway in the middle of Tokyo. Imagine the huge amount of people in your personal space at once. No personal space at all. You can barely move. Everybody's talking at once, so you probably can't even keep your thoughts together. Maybe one person forgot to brush their teeth that morning, and maybe someone else is wearing yucky perfume. And it's just a really horrible environment, and you can't wait for that train to pull into the station so you can get off as quickly as possible and get some relief. So the train pulls in and you get off, and everybody else goes about their day. But for you, this is a new world. You don't know what the next step is. You don't know where to go next. So you have to try and navigate this world alone. So what you do, of course, is a logical thing. You ask somebody for help. You ask somebody for directions. And let's even pretend for a second that you speak a little bit of the language. But maybe when you go up and try to communicate with somebody, it seems that they're speaking very, very fast. Maybe subtle things like body language and facial expression are different, so you're not actually sure, is this person happy to help me, or are they really annoyed that I've stopped them? So at this stage, you're highly anxious, because you're in an environment that's totally uncomfortable for you, and you're not able to effectively communicate with other people around you. So what you have to do, you have to try and go it alone. You have to try and find signs around the station, visual signs, so you can navigate your way out. And as you begin to do this, you begin to relax. You have certainty. You feel in control again. But even as you get to the cusp of the door of the train station, even though it may seem so obvious where to go next, if there's no sign, it's not obvious to you. It's like going back to square one. And imagine after you step over the threshold of the train station, this is the world that you have to live in on a day-to-day basis. This is the world that you're expected to go to school in. This is the world where you'll have to try and get a job. And this is the world where how society will measure your success in. This is what life is like for people living with autism. Because people who have autism live in a world that isn't really built for us. It's a world where those of us with autism maybe communicate a little bit differently, experience the world a little bit differently, and understand the world a little bit differently to other people. The reason I use this analogy is because I like to explain autism as a different culture. Not a right way of thinking or a wrong way of thinking, just a different way of thinking. In this story, the person was constantly adapting to this world, but it seemed this world was never prepared to meet this person halfway. What if I told you 1 in 68 people in the Irish school system currently has a diagnosis of autism? Let's just reflect on that figure for a moment. 68 people. Think of your family, your friends, your extended family. We all know a lot more than 68 people. Do we always know somebody who has autism? Yes. Are we always aware of it? No, because autism is an invisible condition. And is it acceptable in our society that so many people with autism are blocked from inclusion because of how the world works? I know from my work and from meeting thousands of people with autism that every person with autism can succeed and can make a contribution. But people with autism often face huge barriers to achieving this, or are excluded from society's definition of inclusion because of how our society operates. If we take the word success, if I was to ask you to describe to me a successful person, I imagine most of you will cite a very successful business person, or maybe a celebrity, maybe somebody who does very good in school or who's amazing at a particular sport, or somebody who's really achieved the height of their profession. And I believe all of those people may be good examples of success. But that's all that they are, examples. Because I believe the only way we can meaningfully define inclusion is that it's a personal journey towards a person reaching their own personal potential, fulfilling their own goals, and having contentment and happiness for them. There is no typical inclusion, just as there is no typical person with autism. I was looking at the word success, and when we look at the word success, it comes from the Latin meaning to come soon after. So what does that mean? What it basically means is that we need to actually look at, are people with autism in Ireland on pathways that when they follow those pathways, when they do their best, when they show their skills, that they then have an opportunity to fully participate in society. When I was younger, a big movement from parents like my own and others right across the country was the need for people with autism to have access to the same schools as everybody else, to have the opportunity to participate fully in their community, to live in their community for their whole lives, to be able to work in the mainstream labour force. That's so important, and it's a vital first step on the road to inclusion. But what comes after? And I think a statistic tells this very well. We know that 86% of people with autism are either now in a mainstream school or a mainstream class, or an autism class within a mainstream school. And yet what comes after that? 80% of people with autism still experiencing unemployment. This tells a story of real change that is required. And I believe that is because we have to actually look at how we measure success. Having inclusion means more than allowing a person access. It means enabling a person to reach their full potential and to fully participate in a meaningful way. An example that I would use is if we consider how we currently measure success. In the same way as a society, we have this blunt definition. We use blunt instruments to measure it. Perhaps the best of these is Leaving Cert results or league tables, our idea of a good student, our idea of a good school. And yet we know there's so much more to happiness, there's so much more to success. It's about friendship. It's about being able to pursue what you're interested in. It's being able to pursue and achieve your personal potential, whatever that might be and whatever that might look like. And yet we know that this isn't measured, and this isn't how we actually understand what success is in Ireland presently. The example that I would use is it's the equivalent of if we decided we were going to decide what a happy home was on the basis of its BER rating. Now, of course, that's pretty useful. A good first step is to have the place nice and warm. But if that's it alone, that's not enough. That's not getting to the root of the issue. So what are the ingredients for us to build a truly inclusive society for people with autism? We still face huge challenges in the education system, but at least we have a structure to work within. But when people leave school, they're stepping out into the unknown, often with very little support. And we need to ensure that our society has a holistic approach to autism that engages everybody in the discussion, just like Ireland has already done with issues like mental health or LGBT. There's a need for a real movement, and there's a number of ingredients to this. Of course, there's a need to give people with autism the supports and the tools for them to help to manage some of the challenges that they face for themselves. But the message that we must take from our experiences in the education system to date are that we've mainstreamed people in a very Irish way, which is, of course, we'll have people in, but God, let's not talk about it, and we won't change anything. And that simply doesn't work. What we need to ensure is that as people move beyond school system, that Ireland moves beyond autism awareness towards autism understanding. I'm aware that Mandarin is a language. I don't understand it. So therefore, it's not a very good communication tool for me. I can't actually include somebody if I'm only using the English language. Ireland, we've come a long way. We've all heard the word, but I bet we all have different images in our head, different stereotypes, different strange ideas of what autism is. But do we know how we can actually communicate with somebody with autism? Do we know how we can get the environment to be actually correct for a person? Do we know how we can actually enable a person to fully participate? I think the answer to that is no. And it's not just for teachers, it's not just for psychologists, it's not just for doctors. If we want meaningful inclusion so people can succeed in our society, that means everybody. It starts at the person who answers the phone in your organization and it finishes at the desk of the CEO. It must be an entirely holistic process. The second thing that we need to do is we need to really learn how to spell the word disability, because it's spelled D-I-S-A-B-I-L-I-T-Y. The majority of the word is ability, but we only talk about the dis. Indeed, it's often comfortable for us to just focus on what the person can't do. Sometimes our discussion around people who have disabilities literally just becomes a list of the things that the person isn't actually good at or the things that the person isn't able to do. But every single person has talents, has abilities, has contributions that they can make. I've already told you that people with autism think differently. That's another way of saying are innovative. They think outside the box. A lot of people with autism are visual thinkers. A lot of people with autism have specific areas of interest that they can devote themselves to and learn absolutely everything about. People with autism, because of the way we think in a black and white way, often are extremely loyal and honest workers. So we need to actually think outside the box and say, how can we look at the person's abilities and use them to address what the person finds difficult, not just stop there. The next thing that we have to actually be prepared to do is to be flexible and to be adaptable. When this country took a step towards being more inclusive and enabling people with autism to participate in the education system, those of us who had autism had to make huge changes. I myself moved from a special school where there was 6 children in a class and 3 adults to a mainstream school with 20-something students and me and all this noise and this busy environment and this uncertainty. But every day people with autism are doing that. But in return, there needs to be a little bit of adaptability. The example I always use is that it's like when we Irish go on our holidays. And even though we might maintain the local customs and we'll be very polite and everything, when we go out for dinner in a restaurant in the evening, we always expect the waiter to be able to speak English. We need little adaptations to enable us to participate. There's no typical adaptation. There's no typical thing you can do. There's some standard things that people with autism find difficult, or yes, and there's some standard programs that can help. But rather, it's actually getting to know the person. It's encouraging them to feel confident in their own skin and be open with you about what their challenges are. And it's being willing to think outside the box about how you can do that. How can we employ someone with autism but assess their abilities in a different way? How can we enable a person with autism to come to school even if the environment is uncomfortable? How can we ensure that if a person chooses to come to our College of Further Education, that it's not just that they come to their classes and that they leave, but they are actually also able to make friends and that our college societies are inclusive. They're also able to go for a cup of coffee in the canteen because our canteen is inclusive. And the final piece I think that's really, really important for this is that we realize that each and every one of us has a role to play, because each and every one of us every day meets somebody with autism. We have a scenario where we have thousands of people with autism now, the first generation, who are diagnosed as children, now reaching adulthood. And we have a choice to make. Do we want to repeat the mistakes of the past and leave these people to become isolated, to slip out of the education system, to remain unemployed, to not be able to participate? Or are we going to meet the person where we're at? And are we going to say that Ireland can become a society that every single person with autism can participate? Thank you.